thank you for joining Shoes in Bitcoin.
Yeah, thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm all right.
And where are you right now? Are you in Canada?
I'm somewhere on planet Earth. I'll say that much.
So privacy, this is very important in Bitcoin. We have to be very
It's always good advice.
right, definitely. However, you're Peter Todds. Don't trust verify. How can I verify this?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's I mean, how do you even know Peter Todd's the guy who's been showing up to all these conferences?
I don't have clue. I just have to trust this time without being able to verify it.
Well, it's funny. Like one of the interesting things Satoshi did was he, she, or it never actually signed any cryptographic messages. So, like every individual message from Satoshi is really could be another person.
Right. Definitely. And I have listened to actually to your conversation with Peter McCormack,
Yeah, yeah,
interview that you gave back in the beginning of 2019.
yeah. That sounds right.
And you said that you're Satoshi, like Craig, right?
Oh yeah. No, I am Craig Wright,
You are Craig.
and yeah, and Craig Wright is Satoshi,
Mm.
and that guy off in Australia calling himself Craig Wright, he's a fucking scammer.
Right. I have heard about this, but honestly, I don't know anything. I know only Bitcoin. I'm learning about Bitcoin already 4 years, and I have so many things to learn additionally. So back to the serious topic. I'm sorry that we had to start with Craig Wright. Uh, could you please briefly tell me? So after so many years in Bitcoin, actually, you were one of the first people who had also a conversation with Satoshi and Adam Beck. So
Well, I never, as far as I know, talked to Satoshi. And it's interesting, like on the Bitcoin Talk forum, I actually wound up creating my account just after Satoshi left. So of course, I might be him, but
okay.
I never had any discussions, and I think it's important to remember that the remarkable thing about Bitcoin is precisely that who exactly is the creator isn't really that interesting. So, I'm certainly not someone who goes around speculating who
I'm
Satoshi is.
Satoshi. It's possible. Sorry.
Yeah, it could be.
It's absolutely possible.
Yeah.
You know.
You're certainly a lot more likely to be Satoshi than Craig Wright.
Yeah, I prefer being Satoshi, not Craig Wright, if it's possible. But yeah, only just for the protocol. Okay. So maybe I shall state the question in another way, and it's a very open one. Share with me whatever you prefer to share with me, and how actually you have started this Bitcoin journey, and what actually did you do for the protocol, and how the things.
Well, I mean, for me, that starting the journey went all the way back to high school, years prior to Bitcoin being invented. And I got quite interested in something called the Freenet project, which was a decentralized publishing platform to then let people, publish things like publish websites and so on in a decentralized way that was censorship resistant. And I immediately realized that, of course, the only way you can have freedom of speech in practice is if you also have freedom of money. So that got me down the path of trying to go and invent Bitcoin basically. And I failed miserably, but when I did see Bitcoin many years later, it just seemed so obvious to me that it would work. And my journey there was kind of the opposite of most people. For me, I started off thinking, oh, this obviously works. And then I started realizing all the things about Bitcoin that are kind of busted and don't necessarily work so well. And that's when I started getting more into like development and like protocol analysis.
Development and protocol analysis. So
yeah.
Okay. So that's what I've heard during your conversation with Peter McCormack, and you're going to tell me whether this is still the case. is that there is a problem with the inflation schedule of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah. No, I am one of the rare people who thinks Bitcoin should have had perpetual inflation. Not due to any economic reason. I mean, the thing with inflation is, in the context of Bitcoin, currently it's just a tax on everyone's Bitcoin holdings, and that is used to go pay for security. And Bitcoin is a much safer system in the long run if you just keep that tax indefinitely.
And this is not possible to be changed. I mean, this cannot be fixed because it's
Well, it depends on how you define Bitcoin, right? Like, so this gets into how you upgrade Bitcoin and like what upgrades even mean. And in Bitcoin, we have this notion of a soft fork, and we have this notion of a hard fork. And the key thing is that a soft fork is such that Bitcoin validating nodes prior to the point where the protocol changes will still follow along the most worked blockchain. And the way you achieve that is by making sure that the rules that you change are strictly tighter than before. So everything that was invalid stays invalid, but some things that were previously valid to do now become invalid. And the key thing about a soft fork is that you cannot change the money supply upwards in a soft fork, because creating creating money out of thin air is very tightly controlled in Bitcoin. The only way you're allowed to do that is in the block reward, and the amount that you create is fixed, and declining, every 4 years. And to add long-term inflation to Bitcoin, you of course have to go create more money, which is not allowed. Right. You could go and create less money, which would be allowed, but you can't create more money. Yeah. Thus, to go fix this issue, which I think Bitcoin has, you need a hard fork. And the thing with a hard fork is then you get the question of whether or not the end result is still Bitcoin. And that kind of gets to intersection like technology and also society, and like, what is the meaning of Bitcoin? What is a Bitcoin, right? I think it would be quite possible for us to generally agree that, all right, Bitcoin has now changed, and now this thing that's a hard fork is what Bitcoin really is now. And very early on in Bitcoin's history, there were hard forks, but it was so early on that like no one noticed, and also they never got triggered in such a way that anyone would notice. So it's sort of that they only happened, technically speaking. Whereas, to fix this inflation issue, you'd have to do it in a way that'd be very obvious. So I don't know what happens there. I really don't. And, all I can really say is like, this is an issue where it might come down the line in, 10, 20 years.
And do you think there might be something better than Bitcoin in the near future?
Oh, I hope so.
You hope so. I work.
I mean, if I'm going to say that there'll be nothing ever better than Bitcoin, I'm basically saying technological progress won't happen. Right. But the flip side of that statement is that making something better than Bitcoin is incredibly difficult. Bitcoin was the first decentralized money system that actually worked. And it looks like Satoshi really hit on something very, very special. And it seems that there really aren't other ways to do it. And, you see this in how it was so difficult to come up with Bitcoin. It took so long after the invention of all the different moving parts that could have been used to create Bitcoin. And yet it still was, easily another decade before someone finally put all those pieces together and then created Bitcoin. It's such a counterintuitive system if you come from, sort of a conventional cryptography consensus systems background. So going beyond Bitcoin to something even better, I mean, it's like, asking, I mean, who's going to invent the equivalent of the airplane, right? What will be the next thing that's a leap like the airplane? I mean, it's hard to even imagine.
Right. No, absolutely agree. Please allow me to ask such not so relevant questions that would trigger some good conversation.
Yeah.
So you have said that in one sentence, using Bitcoin is using proof of work to make changes to the ledger difficulty.
Yep,
Is
exactly.
it still valid, or you have something better than this one?
Oh no, I think that way of explaining Bitcoin is very valid. Is like the thing to understand is, prior consensus systems, they were very focused on coming to agreement, but they didn't have any focus on defining what the agreement should be, or how you make the data itself meaningful, right? Like, so a way to put it is, normal consensus systems in computer science, they're about getting a few different computers and having a process where they all collectively agree on something. But the problem with that is all these protocols, they collectively agree on a thing, but you have to know what is the collection who's agreeing in the first place, right? Which means their membership is fixed, or at least very difficult to change. Whereas Bitcoin, because we focus on the data and we say we're going to make changing the data expensive in a provable way, then the people who participate in the protocol can be unbounded, because we've kind of flipped consensus on its head. It's not that we came to consensus over the data, it's that the data sort of inherently forces a consensus on us.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to ask you what do you think about NFTs.
I know. I actually have. I might have a bit more nuanced take on it than some people.
This for me, because I'm not a tech person. Obviously, I'm not capable to code, or I'm too lazy to learn myself how to code. Maybe this can be something in my to-do list for the future. But
I mean, funny enough, the website you have up on the screen there, the very first article on it is actually something that I wrote up with intent of making it more efficient to go create things like NFTs as well as other, financial and sort of consensus things.
okay.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that NFTs as we know them are a decent product, but the idea of having a transferable token with cryptography is an interesting thing. And there are some use cases for it. It's just, where the NFT market has gone right now tends to be a pile of fraud.
I honestly, I don't have experience with it. I can make some assumptions, but I know this is not very well to make any assumptions in general. So that's what I have experienced is minting tokens on Liquid, using Liquid. And this was the way I was stacking some sats. But I think, so some fans were sending their appreciation to me for my, let's say, art. So it's nothing serious. Maybe if I start creating a physical art. But yeah. So, and what do you think about Liquid?
I mean, you got to remember, it is a centralized chain. Yeah. Like, Liquid is a federated bank, and that's an acceptable design decision for some applications, but it certainly is not a replacement for Bitcoin.
Like open timestamps are centralized. That's what you have created.
Well, the key thing with Liquid is that, so open timestamps, it's a mix of both centralized and decentralized, because while the process of creating a proof is centralized, validation is decentralized. Whereas in Liquid, because you are trusting the federation, the federation running Liquid, you're able to go verify what they're doing in the context of a financial asset. It's not that obvious, like how exactly you can go deal with that federation censoring you or so on. You basically have to go move to another system. So you certainly couldn't use it for something like Bitcoin, where you need sort of inherently bootstrap value from nothing. Right. Liquid could be appropriate for, say, issuing stocks, right? Where if the Liquid Federation fails on you or censors you or whatever, one viable option is just say, well, all right, the stocks on Liquid are no longer valid. Here's this new system to replace it. And that's an acceptable option for some things. I mean, if you're selling shares in a company, the company itself is a point of centralization. So what you need is more of an accounting system, and Liquid may be all right as an accounting system, but
yeah. So, and talking about Liquid, you know much better than me. There is another experiment with RGB, and I see that so also
yeah,
volume.
yeah. So I'm somewhat involved in RGB, like advising on the design, and I came up with the basic techniques that it goes and uses. And the key thing that RGB is trying to do that Liquid isn't is in RGB, they want the thing that creates the consensus over the given state of an asset to be tied back to Bitcoin directly, which is a lot tougher to implement from a technological point of view, but it does mean that the actual state of the consensus, you're not trusting a third party for it. You can just go back to Bitcoin directly.
Which is, we cannot compare it from technological.
Well, it's like, if you can make it work, it's certainly better than Liquid, but it's quite challenging to make this work. I mean, Liquid is much simpler technology. And, you see it in the fact that it's already deployed and working in production, and it's been working for quite a few years now. Whereas RGB, it's still getting there. I mean, there's more work to do.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And what about renewable energy miners? This is something I've checked that you are thinking about it. Do you like to?
Yeah, even today.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So this is something that is an actual topic in your mind right now. So if you want to talk about that.
Well, I mean, of course, mining, because it can be done, pretty much anywhere. All you need is an internet connection. You don't need a very good one either. The interesting thing is that in conjunction with renewable energy, which often tends to be in sort of very inconvenient places and not necessarily well connected to the grid, you can do a lot of interesting things where you take advantage of electricity that would otherwise just be wasted. I mean, the thing with renewable energy is, if you have a solar panel as an example, well, the solar panel is always producing power as long as the sun's shining. And it does mean often it will be producing more power than you could ever possibly use. And for grids, of course, this is a big problem where it's driving the price of electricity down to zero, or in certain cases negative, as in you will actually get paid to consume electricity. And renewable power has been doing this a lot in a lot of places. And what's nice about Bitcoin is, since Bitcoin can export the results of the energy it produces to anywhere in the world, it creates this market for the surpluses of renewable energy that's after some capital investment is always there. And that's quite advantageous from the point of view of someone trying to go build renewable power capacity. It also helps grids because you always have this kind of baseline load that you can go and show off energy to. So it happens to be a very good fit. And because Bitcoin, there is always demand for mining, at least in the way the current system works, you don't have issues of matching renewable power generation to demand. So it's an interesting combination. It's quite valuable. But now, and I point out what people often have this idea of is that Bitcoin winds up running on coal plants, et cetera, and this is just not true, because non-renewable energy is simply much more valuable because you can turn it on and off. The simple fact is economics do not support running Bitcoin miners off of non-renewable energy, with the exception of things like flare gas, where the gas is not getting captured anyway. It just doesn't work out. It makes far more sense to run off hydro, solar, wind, et cetera, sometimes nuclear if I can get the base load low enough. But
okay, thank you for this
yeah.
output. I would like also to ask you what to think about El Salvador and in general Bitcoin as a legal tender right now, and that everybody they have started working on this.
Well, I mean, you know that I think in the Bitcoin community, there's a very wide range of opinions on this from the point of view of people who are directly helping El Salvador, accomplish this, to people who are extremely against this because they see, the imposition of fiat currencies as morally evil. And, and when I say more like morally evil, I mean that really is the way some people see it. They see participating in this El Salvador thing morally repugnant because you're basically forcing people to accept currency that they don't want. Now, of course, these same people also think all fiat currencies, have these same properties, but just because it's Bitcoin doesn't make them agree. Now, I personally am somewhat more in the middle. I mean, for a Bitcoiner, a bit of a statist. I think there is a place for government, but I think from a practical point of view, like what you're really seeing in places like El Salvador, some of this push will be just corruption for various reasons, but the part that makes sense about this is in countries where so much of their income is coming in through remittances. The fact of the matter is, Western Union in a place like El Salvador can take a significant chunk of the entire GDP. Because they're charging like 2% on every single remittance transfer, and that adds up to a lot of money. And Bitcoin's the kind of thing that can force these companies to just give better deals. Doesn't necessarily mean that like somewhere in El Salvador everyone's going to wind up using Bitcoin, probably not, but it's just a much safer place for a country to be if they have alternatives like this. And a fairly brute force way of getting alternatives is to go make it a fiat currency and force acceptance of it. And of course, the way El Salvador has done it is you have to accept Bitcoin, but you don't have to agree to own it, which is very different than what most fiat currencies are. Because El Salvador gives people, gives companies the option of accepting Bitcoin and immediately turning into US dollars, which of course is the other fiat currency in El Salvador. So, that's more of the creation of a technological means of payments than necessarily forcing people to accept an actual currency.
Right.
Like, remember, normally fiat currencies, the acceptance rule is I can go give you the currency and you must accept it. And there isn't necessarily any opportunity for you to convert the currency to something else. And indeed, like many countries, you just can't convert the currency. I can go pay you in rubles, and there is no way for you to get rid of those rubles and turn them into a currency you actually want. In El Salvador, they're going at the opposite extreme there, where the government will actually turn it into US dollars for you if you choose to.
Yes, it's kind of paradoxical at times, but the whole environment it's a very big paradox, and everybody has different idea, and at the end of the day, it's kind of chaotic and not very fair for everyone. And also,
governments tend to go and do things that aren't necessarily very fair for people. I mean, in a way to go put it is like from a social point of view, the purpose of government is to go force people to do things they don't want to do. Like that's ultimately what governments do. And you may agree with that from the point of view of, well, it's good to force people to do things that are good for the collective whole, but at the end of the day, that is what governments do.
yes, unfortunately, it's like that. And having said that, I'm not sure what's exactly the difference in this case with Bitcoin. If we're going to force people to do something, to force in this enforcement part. But yes, okay. So there are people.
I mean, one thing you can say about it is you are accepting a currency which the government can't inflate. of course, in the case of El Salvador, they're already in that position anyway because the other fiat currency is US dollars, which the El Salvador government has no control over.
Okay, and do you envision a future which we will have only Bitcoin really as a currency?
I don't think it's very likely. There's too much. I mean, a way to go talk about it is, do I, for instance, see a future where we only have, say, euros or US dollars even? And those are things where it certainly makes a lot of sense for everyone to agree on a universal currency, so you don't have all these friction points. But it's just so tempting for governments to go and create currencies to then be able to go and do things like, manipulate the money supply to go, for various political and economic reasons. So I just don't see a path, at least an easy one, where Bitcoin or indeed any cryptocurrency winds up being one universal currency. There will always be governments who want to go and be able to issue money, and there's going to be people who disagree too on like what currency should be universal. I mean, it's notable how even in the days of the gold standard, people still had the secondary currency of silver, which of course caused endless problems as the value of gold versus silver could change. But that's kind of how the economics of it work. At the same time, though, I mean, this idea that you'd have currencies for like every single company, every single community, and so on, that's just crazy. It just does not make sense for people to have to work with a large number of currencies on a day-to-day basis. It just doesn't. It's the whole purpose of currency is to just to get rid of barter and get rid of things like it. So the more currencies you have, the less you're getting an advantage from what is currency itself.
So as long as we have governments, it will be chaotic. This is what you're telling me.
Yeah. And even without government, I think you'd still wind up with, Bitcoin and probably a handful of other things like gold and silver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But
yeah, but it's very complicated as usual, and we can most probably, as long as there was kind of a world, nobody has ever fixed it, and we're only born, and we have a very limited time here on Earth, and we do our best to contribute in the positive way.
Yep.
At least I believe so. There are other people whose positive ways are via negativity, which is, I would say, hard to balance nowadays, having in mind all the things that are happening and the psychological pressure that we're experiencing on all levels. So, but I'm happy that they're good human beings in Bitcoin, and
Bitcoin's pretty good at that. It is interesting how, like, when I started getting into like Bitcoin development, at first I was kind of hanging around, not just Bitcoiners, but also some people from the Ethereum community and other like blockchain stuff. And like over the years, I just did less and less of that because so many of the non-Bitcoin people are just scammers. And I think there's this phenomenon where people who are ethical don't want to be around scammers. And gradually, like, these communities just diverge more and more and more to the point where, there's so little overlap between the Bitcoin and Ethereum world these days, let alone like the Bitcoin and even more crazy, crypto scam world. You just don't see people do development on both.
Right. I wanted to ask you, by the way, because I don't understand from Ethereum anything, and I don't want to talk about it. But because you haven't written anything since 3, 4, 5 years on your website, I have just closed it. And I wanted just to ask you as a final question, just because I've realized I haven't paid my Zoom and we have only 7 minutes left.
Well, you're going to laugh, but part of why I hadn't gone around to updating anything on the website was I hadn't gone around to going and fixing the software that actually makes the blogs run.
Okay.
For a while, I had one command to go and just add a new blog post to it, and for various reasons that broke. That was a bit of a discouragement.
Destiny.
So yeah, and also like some of the things I've been working on have been not things that kind of fit that well in a blog post format and so on. So it just happened to be,
Right. No. I'm not accusing you, Peter.
I
Totally.
should be accusing me. I should do more blog posts.
No, it's just curious. Maybe you have other projects, secret projects you're working on, like making the next Bitcoin. And yeah, okay. We're going to understand when there is something
Yeah.
happening over there for sure, when it's the right time to understand it. Okay, Peter. So I'm really happy and feel honored that you have spent this time with me today. I really appreciate it. You are a very big name in this
Thank you.
world, so it's a pleasure and honor. Really, thank you. I'll be monitoring your tweets, and I saw you also on Mastodon, very active.
Yes, I am. Not super active, but I make a point of using it.
This, if I remember correctly, this happened in the summer of 2018 when there was a big migration from Twitter to Mastodon for some kind of security reasons or
I wouldn't really call it a migration because what happened was people
migration.
set up all
Yeah.
like people. It was more of an addition. Like people who were active on Twitter also got Mastodon accounts. But it's not like people went from Mastodon or from Twitter to Mastodon very much. It's just Twitter's. It's one of those things where you want to be with the crowd, and the fact is, all these discussions happen on Twitter, and it just takes so much effort to move communities over to alternatives. On the other hand, I mean, the fact that Mastodon exists is certainly one of many things that discourages Twitter from, being too censor happy. So it's helpful even if people don't use it as much as maybe they should.
Right. So it's good to have diverse
Yeah.
platforms. I don't know. Honestly, I think I have made an account there, but I haven't used it. It was because of this everybody moving to
Yeah.
That's why I did it.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Thank you, Peter, once
Oh,
again.
thank you.